multi-generational learning in a way that stood up because it's my 30 years of mastering something, right? And when you say now multi-generational, it's just not me anymore, right? You're kind of including the past, present, and ancestral, whatever, the whole world of it, past.
Exactly. Exactly. And that's where when I said my kids aren't really starting with nothing,
Yeah.
right? So it's interesting. If you have children, you will know that you can tell them 1,000 times to do a thing, and likely they won't do it. But there's all these things you never told them that they do all the time. This way that we teach our children implicitly, and the implicit lessons are these intergenerational lessons, right? The implicit lesson is that food is important. The implicit lesson is fascinating. My daughter, I think she came to me one day. She was maybe 16, 17 years old, 17. She said, Mom, why did you do this to us? What did I do? And she said, well, when I walk in the living room and I see the whole family in there, I think, is everybody okay? Does anybody need a tea? Is everybody emotionally okay? Are they comfortable? Do they need a blanket? Is there who's sitting by them? How are they today? And when my brother goes in the room, he just sees uh, the question of where should I sit? Why did you teach us to be this way? Okay, so I immediately got defensive and I was like, I didn't teach you to be this way. And I thought about it for 3/4 of a second and I thought, oh, because that's what I do, right? I go in the room and I'm making sure everyone's all right, that the surfaces are clean, that the room's the right temperature, that people have what they need. And I may have been monitoring their various needs for months and years. So I'm watching through lots of storylines.
Mhm.
My husband comes down. He's like, I'll sit in this chair. And this is this weird engendered transmission that has taken place. And how do we deal with that? I'm not going to ask, how do I teach my daughter not to do that? But what I'd like to ask is, how do I actually teach my son to do it?
Mm.
So that we are not all alone holding all of the nurturing, right? So I think it's wonderful that my daughter has developed the skills to walk into a room and perceive all that information, relational information. But it's like it's something tragic that and to be honest, my son has really gotten much better at it. And in fact, I would say he's definitely on the way. But now he's frustrated with his brothers or his friends because he feels that. So there's this thing, intergenerational, completely unspoken, indirect transmission. And that transmission is infinitely more potent than all the times in the world I could say to him, no, when you go in the living room, be sure you make sure that everybody's okay. Like, that's actually not going to do much. So, how do you train someone in implicit shiftings?
Mm.
That's an interesting question, right? Where is that piece of parenting, of being a partner, of being a community worker or someone who's working for any kind of social systems or healing? Because it's so much is happening in that implicit space. You see why I'm excited. I really want to be working more in Asia
Right.
because there is a lot more practiced, nuance, implicit work there.
Mm. Mm.
If I can just share this, I have a 30-year-old daughter, and recently we've had our nephews live in our home, along with our 82-year-old mother, and Poorani and I are sisters. We've just come back from Singapore where we had a short holiday with all of them at home. And there was one afternoon, my daughter and I had seen her uncle. She said, would you like something for lunch? He said, no. And we proceeded to prepare our own lunch, and we sat down and we started eating. And then my mother came and she just stood above us both, like, what are you doing? And we said, well, we're having something to eat. Would you like to join us? There's some extra. But she was obviously disapproving of whatever that we were doing. We then went off because we had a meeting, and my daughter was going, I can't believe this. And I had not said a single word. My mother had not said a single word. Why is grandma so upset that we didn't make lunch for everyone? And subsequently, my mother and I had a run-in, and she said, why didn't you do that? I said, well, I offered. Two others were going to eat later, and my brother had said no. But it was like, you're meant to cook for everyone. You can't eat on your own. And my daughter is listening to this and she's going, that's so sexist.
Right.
Grandma, how can you expect that? And I get it. So I turned to my daughter when grandma was not around and I said, I'm not like that, Isha. I told her that. And she said, she was sort of half convinced because she watches me, although I'm not demanding that of her like the way my mother does. Right? So I'm complicit in it.
And your mother doesn't have to be demanding with you because you do it.
Exactly.
So, but now here's my question, because I think it's a beautiful notion. If you're going to make food, don't make it just for yourself. Absolutely with that. It's just that it needs to not just be the women. It needs to be the family, the household, the grouping, whatever it is, we're in this together. And certainly there's gendered rules, and this is where the intergenerational habits that I'm talking about, how do we take this knowing that is so old and allow it to move in new ways? Because there's nothing wrong with the beautiful ancient understanding of sharing a meal. I mean, it's so important. It's really not about being hungry. It's not about nutrients. It's not about what time of day it is. It's about being human and being alive together. And the conversation and the table and the culture and the courtesy and the love that is expressed, the healing that's expressed through that. So the food is not the food. It certainly isn't the recipe. It also isn't what's on your plate, right?
Yeah.
So it's so important because I love food as an example of this too, because it really, it exists in this very practical way, where we could talk all sorts of societal change models. We could talk about environmental models to get the particulate out of the atmosphere. We could talk about, dealing with all kinds of issues of capitalism and so on. At some point, we're also just talking about how people who live together have a meal. And inevitably, all of the ideas and the assumptions and the habits and the possibilities of these much bigger global systems changes are right there in what happens at that table and what happens in the preparing of the meal and what happens when the multiple. I love that you use the description of 3 generations. My mother was living with us for a couple of years before she died, and it was fascinating. It was fascinating to see the way the generations were reflecting off each other, these differences in assumptions, and what the deep benefits were of each generation's contribution to the conversation. Your daughter's so right, and your mother is so right, that neither of them are wrong.
Yeah.
And this is why we need multi-generational learning. This is why these sort of moments they're so precious and a little uncomfortable.